It's nice to be here again for my second presentation, which will be my last presentation. But yeah, you said it right, I'm preaching on Sunday, so you're welcome to join us. And today I want to talk about the history of the Protestant Church of Central Germany in a nutshell. Because it's some centuries I want to cover, and it's more of an introduction. And I already said about every time I talk about, you could do a whole lecture about. So there's a lot to tell, and I try to give you a look out into the history of the German Protestant Church. So you see the picture already. We start with the Reformation, which could be a potential start of the Protestant Church in Germany. And that's the question I want to start with. At what point can one speak of a Protestant church? And that's a question you cannot simply answer with a simple sentence. There are many dates you could choose. And like I said, you could choose October 31st, 1517, the 95 Theses. Luther, we think, put on the door of the church in Wittenberg, but we don't know if he really did that. But what we know is he sent his thesis to the bishop to criticize the practice of the Catholic Church at the time. So you could say everything I talk about now starts there. But you can also say it started at the Reichstag of Worms, where Luther had to talk about what he meant, and they wanted him to resign from his thesis and to step back from criticizing the church, which he didn't want to do. So he refused to step back and still criticized the Catholic Church. And maybe that's the point you could choose where you could say this is the start of the Protestant Church. But everything started somehow, and the first services in German languages, they started around 1522 or 23. So the landscape of the church already started to change because people started to celebrate service in the language of the people, in the German language, and stopped doing it in Latin. So the people could actually understand what the pastor was talking about and what happened in the service. So maybe that was the point where it all started. Another date you could possibly choose is the first German bishop, Nikolaus von Amsdorf. He was appointed as bishop in Naumburg an der Saale in 1542, but that's a date I choose maybe mainly because I'm from Naumburg. But you can say there was a certain church hierarchy established, and maybe you can say with a established church there was a Protestant church, because after all you have to say Luther never started because he said he wanted a Protestant church, and he didn't want this church to be called Lutheran either. So he didn't really wanted to found a new church, but he wanted to reform the church he was in. But that didn't happen, so it all goes on to the Peace of Augsburg in 1552. And that's an important date because in Augsburg there met all the princes of the states, and the emperor was there, and they chose they have to get clear how they want to move on, because they already started some wars in the centuries before because of the different churches and the different beliefs. And so they wanted to overcome that and met in Augsburg and the Protestant side was asked to write what they believe in, so they can talk about it. And this was called the Confessio Augustana. It was the creed of the Protestants who wanted to make clear what their belief is all about, and the other side didn't accept that. But for the Protestant side, it was a sort of foundation document. And if you are a Lutheran pastor in Germany, you still are ordained on the Confessio Augustana and the creeds of the Lutheran Church. So I brought a lot of maps to my presentation because I think it's good to have them to understand how the landscape of what we now call Germany has changed over the years. So this is the Holy Roman Empire around 1555, at the time of the Peace of Augsburg I just talked about. And you see, it was not so much a centralized country. It was a lot of small, I forgot the name, but yeah, a lot of small states, right? And a lot of different kings and princes of the states, and it was all pretty clustered. So it was difficult to have one opinion in the Holy Roman Empire. And I have some text about the Peace of Augsburg. So some imperial states of the Holy Roman Empire have accepted the Reformation. It was a thing of the princes of states or of the kings to choose one side. So some of them, they chose the the Protestant belief. But the Emperor Karl V, he fought against the Reformation. So you had two different sides, and like I said, there was already a war going on. It was the Schmalkaldic War from 1546 to 47, and it was the first denominational war in the Holy Roman Empire. So the first war where the Catholic side fought against the Protestant side. The Protestant side lost, but still you had to find a solution. How can you go on with the different states and the different beliefs? And slowly there was a principle which was called cuius regio eius religio. It's Latin, and it means whose region, his religion. So the people who were the kings and the princes of states in the states, they could choose what religion was the religion of their state. In the Peace of Augsburg, this principle was written down, and each prince of state could choose now between Lutheranism and Catholicism. The impacts were that there were two sides in one empire, which made it pretty difficult, and the state princes, they chose freely. The states sometimes were even switching sides, and the population was free to leave if they don't agree to it, which was pretty hard for the population because you had to pack everything up and go to a state where they are, if you are Catholic, Catholic, or if you are Protestant, Protestant. And there was something special going on. Some state princes were choosing Calvinism. But Calvinism wasn't a part of the Peace of Augsburg, which made it difficult. So there were two famous state princes who chose Calvinism. One was Gebhard I of Waldburg. He converted in 1582. And he has been fought for it because the other ones, they said, well, it's not Catholicism and it's not Lutheranism, so we can attack him and we take his land because it's not right what he is doing. And there was a famous person too who did that. It's Johann Sigismund. He converted in 1613 on Christmas Day. And this is a very famous conversion because he allowed his population to stay Lutheran. And this was not done before, and he wasn't attacked, but it was established that the head of the state had another denomination than his population, which was pretty strange at the time, but still has gone on since today. If you have questions, please ask, because I already see some eyebrows rising. Yeah.
When was the word Lutheran, Reformation, when did that come into using it as a common?
When did we use the word Reformation commonly? That's a good question. I know that in the 16th century there was the Reformed Church, and they called themselves Reformed because they didn't want to name themselves after a person like the Lutherans did. But I think they already used it in the 16th century, but I'm not sure, but we can come to it later and I look it up. So, I was with Johann Sigismund. He was in what is called Brandenburg. We still have a state called Brandenburg today. In the meantime, it was named Prussia, so maybe you know Prussia. But he was pretty famous for converting to Calvinism, and the population remained Lutheran. We call this process confessionalization, because slowly there were different denominations, different confessions, and they started to settle in and to have documents where they said what they believe. And then another famous incident happened. It's called the defenestration, and it was the defenestration of Prague, where the Protestant lords threw their Catholic Lord Regents out of the window. I don't know if you learn about it in school, but in German schools it's pretty famous because they just threw them out of the window, and but they didn't were killed in it, because the buildings they had back in the time, they were getting smaller on top, so they more or less slided down on the grass. But it started one of the most destructive wars in Europe, the 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648. And it threw the Holy Roman Empire in a big war where a lot of landscapes were pretty rough handled. And the 30 Years' War, it ended with the Peace of Westphalia, and it's important because now Catholicism, Lutheranism, and Calvinism were officially equalized. So there were officially 3 denominations in the Holy Roman Empire at that time, and the territories where everything happened, they were defined, because the war changed a lot of territories, and in the Peace of Westphalia, they settled it and said, this is it now, and we can keep it that way. So we have now 3 different denominations in the Holy Roman Empire. And I show you another map. It's the Holy Roman Empire at the end of the 30 Years' War. And you see it's still very clustered. On the right side, you see Bohemia. And on the top right side, you see slowly what we later called Prussia forming. Yeah, but the clustering got on, and it was pretty complicated because now you have 3 different confessions. And some time passed, I did a little skip here in my maps, and we are now at the end of the 18th century. And we are just before the coalition wars, which we sometimes also call the Napoleonic Wars. But you can see the clustering, it went on and on, but some regions got a little bigger. You see Prussia got a little bigger, but on the western side of the empire it was still pretty clustered. I show you this map because with the coalition wars, a lot of the landscape changed in the Holy Roman Empire. This is the Holy Roman Empire only a few years later, and you see on the left side the Empire of France. It slowly took over the left side of the Rhine, which is important for something I will shortly talk about. But all the regions on the left side on the Rhine were taken by France, and it sort of consolidated on the right side. And you see some things like what now still is called Brandenburg, later Prussia, got even a little bigger. And then we in Germany are famous for our long words. We got a very famous word in our history. It's the Reichsdeputationshauptschluss. And it's a complicated word, but mainly it was a paper where they wanted to settle how the regions can look like after the coalition wars. But we are still in the coalition wars, and the Reichsdeputationshauptschluss was a major territorial reform. And it was very important because there started the secularization of ecclesiastical states. We still got ecclesiastical states to the early 19th century, which means the church owns land and the bishop is the one who manages it. But because of the territories the empire lost on the left side of the Rhine, you had to compensate it on the right side. So what the empire did was they took the land from the Catholic Church, which they owned, and the Protestant Church, because there were some states that were Protestant states managed by the church, or as managed by the head of the states, but for the church. But they took the land from the churches and gave it to the head of the other states, which is still important today because they said, well, we can't just strip the churches of their land. We have to compensate them for it too. So they gave them money. And later in the 20th century, they even got it in the constitution that the churches have to be compensated for the land taken in 1803. And we still get that compensation as a church today. And it's a lot of the budget the church has. But our constitution now says, since the Second World War, since we are a republic, the constitution said usually, you have to end these payments. Some government has to end them. But if you end them at one time, you have to pay a lot more money than giving something every year. So it got on and on and on, and the churches still get these compensations today. And other states who lost territory on the left side of the Rhine got compensated with this secularized territory and with other territories, mostly smaller states. So in the end, the bigger states got even bigger. And then they sat down for another paper, which was, this was called the Wiener Congress, the Congress of Vienna, which was pretty important because the coalition wars were over, and they said, well, we have to manage how the land looks like after these wars, and we have to settle the land. So it was another reorganization after the coalition wars, and it was meant to be a restoration back to what it was before the coalition wars. With this, they wanted to prevent revolutions, and they wanted to prevent the revolutions that were either for freedom or for nationalistic aspirations, because already the idea grew in the Holy Roman Empire that maybe you could put these small states together and form a big empire. But this was a pretty liberal thought at the time. And the conservative part thought was to keep it as it is in the small states. So in the end, at the Congress of Vienna, the bigger states now got even bigger. So over these 12 years from the Reichsdeputationshauptschluss to the Congress of Vienna, they grew and grew and grew. And after it, the German Confederation, not called Empire anymore, looked like this. So you see it's not so clustered anymore, and the states got somehow to bigger states. And you see on the top right side, Prussia is now officially Prussia, and it got pretty big, which is important for the later history of the empire. So you see it is still clustered, but not so much anymore. Somehow the states formed, and you see if you take out Austria, which is on the lower right side, you already see some of the borders of Germany we still have today. So I want to give you a little example with the town of my birth, Naumburg. So we can see how the landscape changed over the years and the states changed. The city of Naumburg was first documented in 1012, you say 1012 or 1012? 1012. And in 1021, a provostry was founded in Naumburg. So
What does that word mean, provostry?
I just looked it up because I know the German word, but I didn't know the English word. It's where the bishop resides. A bishopry, all right. A bishopry. Yeah, because in the next point I got a bishopric. Maybe that's the word I needed. And 1028, there was a relocation of the seat of the bishopric. And over the years, the bishops resided in Naumburg or in Zeitz, which is a town pretty close to Naumburg. And the bishop led the bishopric, but at the same time he acted as a prince-bishop for the land the church owned, which was called Hochstift. This was the land that belonged to the church, to Naumburg at this time. So there wasn't a state prince who was responsible for it, but the church, and more concrete, the bishop. So you got this little piece of land where the bishop resided and owned the land, and you can see it was still pretty small. But it got on, and the last prince-bishop, he died in 1564. And in the course of the Reformation, it became a Lutheran Hochstift. So it still was the land like it was, but from a Catholic church, it went to a Lutheran church, and what was administered by the Albertine Wettins, which was a family. I'm missing the word. I should have gotten some of my words better. It's a sort of royal family on a smaller scale. And so it wasn't a Catholic land anymore, and it was still owned by the church, but administered by a powerful family, yeah, which did it to, which had their own land, but they did it for the church, sort of. They were the managers somehow. But later, the land got swallowed up by the land of Sachsen-Zeitz. It's a, how do you pronounce it? Duchy. The Duchy of Sachsen-Zeitz. So the states, they swallowed these smaller states from time to time and got bigger themselves. And finally, you still have the clustered map in mind. Finally, it was swallowed by an even bigger state, which was Prussia in 1815, after the Congress of Vienna. And it became part of the Prussian state of Saxony, which is not to be confused with the Kingdom of Saxony, which is nearby, but which is another state, which is important for the later state churches. So you see, this was the Duchy of Sachsen-Zeitz around 1680, and it was pretty clustered all over the land. But by 1815, it was swallowed by Prussia, and it looked like this. This is what Prussia looked like at 1815. And you see, it spread out across the empire because over the time, they got more land and more land. It's because they married, oftentimes they married or they fought wars. And so they expanded their land and sometimes got a piece of land that was even a little far away, but then belonged to the state. And here you can see Prussia with its own states. And now I want to show you a little something, because you can still see these borders today in Germany, but not in our official states, but in our state churches, which is called the Landeskirchen. And I show you this map I showed you before from 1815, and you see the little bigger states already. And on the left side, you see our state churches like they were 2008. I took 2008 because since then some of these made a fusion. They merged and got together and formed a bigger state church. But with the smaller state churches from 2008, you see the borders a little better. So when I put this over another, you can see there are still some borders in the state churches. I can take it back a little and make it again, and you see the state churches, yeah, they almost fit over the states from 1815, but not everything, because on the left side you see there is a border that wasn't in the other map, but the border comes when you look at the Prussian states, because the Prussian states were separated in the state churches, and when you take this map and lay it over this map, it looks a little confusing now, but then you have all the borders of our state churches in Germany we still have today. Because this is the map of our state churches today, and you see on the top and in the middle where I'm from, some of them, they got together and formed a bigger state church. Where are you on that map? I'm right here. The one with the stripes. And this belongs together. But I have another map for you. I said I have many maps. But you understand somehow how everything formed. Because on the right side you see the states we have in Germany nowadays. Not to confuse with the state churches you see on the left. So you see, as state churches we kept our borders from 1815, but the German states, the political states we have today, they were formed after the Second World War, and they weren't formed after the states we had before, and the state churches show. So it's a little difficult for us as a church to always explain how we are not a church of a state, like the political state, but we have different borders, and sometimes they overlap, and it's very difficult.
To you reduce the number of principalities
Yeah,
by 90%.
yeah,
And he just did 10. He said, well, Bechstein is one of the 10% that bit the dust.
yeah. That's right. They get swallowed up by the bigger states, and some of the royal families sort of they remained, but don't have any land anymore.
But they still receive that honorific.
Yeah, they are still called sometimes by their names, which we kept in Germany, but for example in Austria, they changed it so you don't have these royal names anymore. But in Germany, they have this tradition of their names, and they still have very long names sometimes. But you see, the state churches and the political states we have today, they are not the same, and that makes things complicated sometimes. And now I want to talk about another man who had a big impact for our church in Germany, and it was Friedrich Wilhelm III of Prussia. And why was he important for our church? He was important because he formed the union in our church, the Prussian Union of Churches. Friedrich Wilhelm III decreed as the head of the state and church and head of the church in Prussia that Lutheran and Reformed churches will be unified. His goal was a unified state church. He ignored dogmatic contradictions. That means he was the head of Prussia, and like I told you, Johann Sigismund, one of his predecessors a long time ago, he converted to Calvinism, and so Friedrich Wilhelm had this state where the royalty belonged to the Calvinist faith, and the population still belonged to the Lutheran faith. And he wanted to change that. He didn't like that his state had two different denominations in it. And some say he wanted to change it because his wife was Lutheran, and they couldn't celebrate communion together. So he just decreed it, and he said, as a head of state and as a head of the church, I can just do it. And he unified Lutheran and Reformed churches in administration. That means the churches still kept their denomination, but they were managed as one church and with one head of church. But what it also did was some united churches emerged. That was something that hasn't been there before. So they said, well, we don't have to be separated in two denominations. We can just say we are one united church. And they put those two confessions together and said, well,
Were there Catholics too in there?
Usually not. Usually not. Yeah. And but in doing so, he didn't really make friends with the people of the church, because some pastors they were revolting, and churches who didn't agree with Friedrich Wilhelm, they were oppressed, because some said, well, we don't want to be united with the Reformed, and the Reformed said, we don't want to be united with the Lutherans, but they had to, simply. And they were already angry, and he made them even angrier when he, 1821, created a mandatory order of worship for every congregation. And he did that by himself, which made everyone even angrier, because they said, well, he is our head of church, but he's not really in the profession. And a lot of churches and pastors were pretty angry about it, and some of them were totally for it and wanted to push it. But some pastors and councils revolted against it, and some criticized it. Famously Schleiermacher. I put that in for Shelley, but it's sad she's not here. Yeah, because he said, well, a united church is good, said Schleiermacher, but he didn't agree to the way the king wanted to do it, because it was pretty, with a hard hand, he wanted to push it through. And some fought for a greater unification because they thought it is a good idea to have a united church in a united state. And some Lutherans who did not want to support the united church founded a new church, which wasn't allowed at the time. It was, in fact, illegal, and it was only allowed in 1841. So they did it underground, or they left the country and fled. A lot of them fled into the US, because here you can choose you could choose back in the day your faith freely, which wasn't allowed in Prussia. You had to choose what you want, and if you were not part of the official state church, you more or less did it underground, which was not allowed. We still have united churches today, and not all of the state churches who are united churches today became united churches by order of the head of the state. Some of them became united churches because they said, we want to become united, and sometimes they even formed a new creed, to a new confession, where they said, well, we write a new text, and we have the Lutheran confession, we have the Reformed confession, and we have some form that puts those two beliefs together and explains how we can do that. And you can see on this map I showed you the united churches. It's the one, I think it's blue. Like I said, I'm colorblind, but which you see in the middle. These are the united churches. And because my state church in Mitteldeutschland, in central Germany, formed from two different state churches, we are striped like that because we are officially united and Lutheran, because the state church of Thuringia was Lutheran, and the northern part of our state church was united. And when they became one, they said but we keep those two systems.
In this country, they have often had German Reform and Dutch Reform. How do they connect back to the mother country?
That's a good question, but I think a lot of them, they went to the US because they were oppressed, like Baptists, who had it pretty hard all the time, because I never mentioned them because they were always suppressed, because they weren't allowed. Some of them came later, some of them came earlier. That's the difference, but a lot of them, they didn't want to be part of that official state church. But I think some of them just came here for other reasons and formed their churches just to keep their faith.
So on the map, where are the purple areas?
Yeah.
Are they the areas where they did not join the official?
And purple.
Bayern?
Yeah. So the blue ones are the United State churches, and the purple ones are the Lutheran state churches. They are only Lutheran. And in the north, it's also striped because it was, like you see on the left, in 2008. That's why I have these maps now on the screen. In the north, they formed a new state church out of 3 former state churches, and they also had different confessions.
And the two light, the Oldenburg and the
Yeah. in the south, you see the state church of Württemberg, and Württemberg is not officially part of the United or the Lutheran Church, but has a guest status. So they still meet each other, but they are not part. We have these umbrella organizations for the Lutheran Church and the United Church, and they are part of neither. Excuse me? They are independent. You can say sort of, yeah, but they still have a lot of Lutheran and Reformed churches. But as a state church, they are just not member of. They still get the money, but they only have a guest status in the umbrella organization, so they don't have the same rights there. But Württemberg has a special history as it was heavily influenced by the Pietism. You call it Pietism? No? Pietism. Pietism. Yeah, and they had a big Pietist movement, which said, well, maybe those confessional standpoints aren't as important as our faith, so maybe we should not go as hard with it as the other ones do it. And that's one of the reasons why they didn't join the umbrella organizations. Yeah, on the left you can see, I just wanted to show you this map to show you the merging we did in central Germany. You see they were 2 different state churches, and in the north you had 3 different to form to one. The Protestant church in the German Empire was founded under the leadership of Prussia, because Prussia got the head of the Prussian king was the emperor of the German Empire. And Prussia was the former state of Brandenburg and of Johann Sigismund, I told you about, who converted to Calvinism. So it still plays an important part in this part of history, because Germany was formed to one empire, and they did it without Austria. It was called the Kleindeutsche Lösung, the small German solution, because originally they wanted to have Austria in it, but they couldn't agree on each other and fought a war. And after they said, well, we just do it without Austria. And so the majority of the empire was Protestant. So a lot of Protestants were pretty positive about the empire, because they thought, well, we are the majority and the emperor is also a Protestant, so everything is going well and it's going on. And but there were still tensions, like the Kulturkampf, the culture war, led by Otto von Bismarck. He tried to reduce the influence of the Catholic Church in the empire, because he said the Catholic Church, he found it a little backwards, because at the time it was more of a reactionary force, and the Catholic Church fought for its influence in the European countries. So he tried to reduce this influence of the Catholic Church and made some reforms, where I got you an example. The civil marriage, I got an A too much in this word. The civil marriage was introduced. So you didn't have to be married in a church, you could do it just at a city office. And this is what the German Empire looked like at the time. And you see the darker part is Prussia, which got pretty big by the time, so you can understand the big influence Prussia had on the German Empire. And the southern parts, and especially Bavaria, is still a very Catholic region, so you maybe understand why when you see this map. And then we go on in history, and after the First World War, Germany became a republic. It's the November Revolution, and in becoming a republic, there were no sovereigns as heads of state and church anymore. which plays an important part for our churches, because now they had to operate on themselves without a king as head of the church. And so the churches became independent, and state and church were separated in most parts, we have to say, in Germany, because you can't really say we are completely separated when you get a lot of money from your government as compensation for something that happened a few hundred years ago. It's not really fully independent. But the state churches, they gave themselves new names and organized themselves democratically. And the compensations I told you about, they were written in the new republic's constitution, so it's in the constitution, and they left it there even after the Second World War. So we became a republic. But it's still, they are not sure if this is an authentic picture, but it's a very famous picture where they proclaimed the new republic, but some are assuming it may be it wasn't the real occasion where they took the photo and did it later. Now the text is a little smaller, but we come to a difficult time in our history, and a difficult time for the Protestant church in Germany. In 1930, the Landeskirchen, the state churches, formed a loose umbrella organization because they said, well, we could organize ourselves and have an organization where we come to talk. And we still have an umbrella organization today, but it started in 1930. And many Protestants welcomed the new socialists, the National Socialists' rise to power. They saw it as getting back some of the power they lost after losing the First World War and getting back some influence. But after the Aria paragraph, a paragraph where they made it illegal for Jews to work as civil servants and to work in official positions, there were voices raised against the new regime from the Protestant church, where they said, well, this is a point where we have to do something against it. This goes too far. But not everyone raised their voices. Some were still welcoming the National Socialists, and the Deutschen Christen, the German Christians, were formed. A group of Protestants trying to merge National Socialism and Christianity. That's a big part of this part of history, because they tried to get those two things together, famously in changing parts of the Bible, or saying Jesus, well, he wasn't a Jew, he was the son of some Aryans going through the region, and they got rid of every mentions of Judaism in the Bible and in the songs, and they tried to make it a German national church without which has nothing to do with anything in Israel or with Judaism. And so a fight over the church leadership emerged because there were resisting forces named the Bekennende Kirche, the confessing church. They formed and tried to fight against the regime, but it was difficult because it was also organized, the state churches were organized democratically, and there began some sort of war over these elections. And the Bekennende Kirche, the confessing church, tried to prevent the Deutschen Christen, the German Christians, from winning these church elections, and met in their own synod. So even if they lost the election, they tried to form a synod without these National Socialists. And they distinguished between the aligned churches, which voted German Christians in, and the still intact churches which weren't overtaken by the German Christians. And in 1934 they wrote the Bekennende Kirche, the Confessing Church, they wrote the Barmer Theologische Erklärung, the Barmen Declaration. The Barmen Declaration is a very famous declaration because it was an official paper which criticized the National Socialists and everyone trying to merge the church with this ideology. Famous members of the Confessing Church were Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Karl Barth, who also worked on the Barmen Declaration. The Barmen Declaration is still important today because we can, when we get ordained, we have to choose between Lutheran confessions, Reformed confessions, or United confessions in my state church, but we still can add the Barmen Declaration, not as a creed, not as a confession, but as a sign of it's important to me and I still support this idea. And I just brought you the first thesis of the Barmen Declaration, so you get to know it a little bit and you get a feeling for it. And it always starts, and the thesis always start with a quotation from the Bible, and in this case, two quotations. The first is from John 14. Jesus Christ says, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." And then from John 10, "Very truly I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved." And the first thesis is Jesus Christ, as testified to in the Holy Scriptures, is the one word of God that we must hear, trust and obey in life and in death. We reject the false teaching that the church can and must recognize other events and powers, figures and truth as God's revelation in addition to and alongside this one word of God as the source of its proclamation. So they separated themselves from these forces trying to merge these two, the faith and the ideology, and said, no, this isn't right. And here are some pictures of these church elections. You see on the left side, one is advertising the German Christians on the left side, and the man on the right side, his sign says, church must be church, has to keep being church, vote for gospel and church. And on the right side, you see that these elections not always were fair elections, because you see the people going into the church to vote, and you see a member of the SR staying on the outside and pushing the people to vote for the German Christians. So these were not fair elections. But after the Second World War, our church became a church in a divided country. After the war, the Landeskirchen organized themselves in a parliament system again democratically, and the churches in the German Democratic Republic were heavily suppressed by the communist government. Oftentimes, they were supported by partner churches in the West. So where I worked, some of the congregations, they said, well, when we had to do the roof, we got a lot of tiles from our partner church in Western Germany, and sometimes they got support financially because the churches were suppressed. They couldn't do a church tax system in Eastern Germany and didn't get any money, and the pastors were poorly paid. So the churches had it pretty hard and had to find ways to overcome that. Christians in the German Democratic Republic often weren't allowed to make their Abitur or were pressured beforehand to join party organizations. So if you were pretty tight with your church and wanted to get your high school, we got a school system where you get a diploma before high school, but if you want to study, you need the Abitur, which is like a high school diploma. And if you were too tied to your church, you weren't allowed to do your high school diploma. You just couldn't apply for it, and that's why the churches formed their own sort of high schools where you could do your diploma, and after it you can even study theology. And that's why studying theology was popular among those who weren't allowed to study. Pastors earned the bare minimum, and many members left the church. So I got three things together in one now, but you weren't allowed to study. I got to know a lot of older pastors who said, well, I want to become a physician, I want to study math or something, but I wasn't allowed. So the only thing, if I wanted to study, I could do was study theology at the church's seminary. So I did that and I became a pastor. But as pastors, as I said, they earned the bare minimum. Some of them told me, well, when I started as a pastor, I didn't get enough money to get over the month with my family, so I were pretty dependent on the congregation of them giving me some food and supporting me. But there were a lot of church members who simply said, well, if I'm not allowed to study, well, then I leave the church, and maybe I even join the party organization, because then I show a goodwill, and I am allowed to do it, and that's a reason why many members left the church, because it was the easier way. You weren't allowed many more things, and you didn't had to fear repressions. But after the unification, the Western state churches started to support the state churches of the East financially, and are still doing it today. My state church, its budget is 1/3 donations of the Western state churches. But they also lose members nowadays, and they are thinking about how long they can give us this kind of support. So sometimes it looks a little grim when it comes to that. But the churches in the German Democratic Republic were a place for the people who didn't agree with the communist government. It was a church for the people who couldn't fit in the system, and the churches were a place where they could go. And you see here what was a famous thing churches did. They allowed concerts in the church. Concerts that were not officially allowed and were watched by the government because it was sort of punk rock, and it was a rebelling sort of music, and sometimes rebelling against the government. And the churches, they gave them a place where they could do this.
So you're saying that was in East?
Excuse me, we got people online, more online than in person, by the way. So if you could, speak into the mic.
Well, were you saying that was in East Germany, what we call
Yeah,
East,
yeah.
not?
That was in East Germany, yeah, sorry. I just wanted to give it the official name, because East Germany was not sort of the official name, so, but this was in, all right.
Hold on.
In the GDR, were there separate institutes or seminaries?
Yeah, there
Or were they part of the university?
No, they got separate. I think you could study theology in Berlin at the university, but they got smaller seminaries which were more separate from the universities, because they didn't really want it to be a part of the university. So actually in Naumburg, where I was born, there was a small seminary, but some of them who went there, they said it was a nice seminary, but you felt pretty separated from other students because there was no university in this small town. it was only the seminary, so it was pretty separated in that way.
I'm sorry, who was next? Tom?
We had, I lived in Berlin for a while, got my master's degree in Berlin, and I got to know a number of Germans, including a German family in Eastern Germany. And the daughter could not go to the university because she was part of the church and very active in the church. So she was going to do something less. During that summer, East Germany, split apart, and it was the end of the GDR, and so she actually went back to Berlin, and it was admitted to the university to study medicine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, after the unification, there were a lot of people going to the university which weren't allowed to do it, or weren't allowed in a major they wanted to do, in a subject they wanted to do. So there were a lot of mid or end 20 people who said, well, now I have the opportunity to go to university still and make the career I wanted to do in the first place. So that happened a lot.
Hold on.
You always need a microphone, so
You do.
everyone
There's a big audience.
understands you.
Okay. Did the Stasi infiltrate the church?
Yeah. They tried. So for everyone, the Stasi was the Staatssicherheit, what you could call state security, literally maybe, but it was the secret police, which oftentimes spied on its own population to make sure they are in line and not opposing against the government. And they, like on a concert like this, you had to expect at least one of them being there and looking who's doing what. And it was like the churches were a place for the people opposing the government. And I can tell you a little story. When I got to the job where I am now, one time I met my predecessor, and he was pretty beloved in the village and in the other villages around, and especially by the youth. And he came there, and I said, well, when you are here, let me just show you your old parsonage, your old home. And because he hasn't been there for a long time, and my wife and I, we showed him around and showed him the house, and he said how much it changed since then, because it looked pretty poorly back in the day when he was there. And when we were standing in the hallway down there, he said, well, you see this window behind the stairs? And we said, yeah, we see the window. What's about the window? And he said, oh, well, after the unification, I read my report. There was an archive established where you could read what the Stasi, the secret police, wrote about you. So he went to the archives and he read it, and he said, well, in my report, they wrote there's a window on the backside of the building, and if we ever need to seize him to get to his house and get him to jail, he might try to flee out of the backside window. So we have to get somebody standing there just in case he doesn't flee the building. So it was a hard time for them. So, but yeah, sometimes we even had congregation members working for the Stasi. It was something you had to, I think, always expect somehow. But some people, sometimes they were really sad reading the reports and realizing, oh, it's a person I trusted, and I told him so much, and he just told them everything about me. And here's another picture from the church. Like you said, you had a trip to Germany once and went to Leipzig. And Leipzig was famous for the peaceful revolution, what we call it. And in the peaceful revolution, which ended in the unification, the churches played a pretty big part, because the people met at the churches and they had prayers for peace, and they had a lot of candles, and they met in the church and spoke there, and then went to the demonstration on the street with a lot of candles, and it all started in the churches, which you can still visit in Leipzig and which were a big part of the peaceful revolution. And you can see here they were a place where you can speak more openly and demonstrate. Or protest, like you would call it. Maybe protest is the better word. And yeah, it's one of my last pictures. It's Religion in Germany 2011. And I just want to show you this picture because you see there are different colors. And the darker colors are the absolute majority. The lighter colors are the relative majority. And you can see on the western part what was Western Germany. You can see in the north there are a lot more of Protestants. It's the color for the Protestants. And in Bavaria you can see it's more of a Catholic country. And in the west you see also a lot of Catholic. We call them Kreise. It's the little ones what you would call counties probably. And yeah, what was Eastern Germany, the color you see there, is an absolute majority of no religion. So you can see that the GDR, the system, it worked. It got a lot of people out of the churches, and we still see that. Our church, the numbers of our church members are so much lower than in Western Germany. It's pretty hard sometimes to even keep the structures we have as a state church. And I think the map speaks for itself that it had a pretty big impact to our country. So this was a very quick overview of our church history, and I realized it's pretty complicated to talk about it because I have a lot of things in my head, but sometimes I miss the right words for it. But I think it's a pretty interesting history and a very rich history, which with a lot of different sides and a lot of different aspects. And as I said before, you can about every period I talked about, you can make a whole lecture about it. And yeah, so that's that. Maybe I hope I could bring some new aspects or some things you didn't know before. And like I said, it's just really in a nutshell. I tried to compromise it, to make it really small. I can give a quick overview. But if you have any questions, then just ask, and I really hope I can answer them. Microphone in the oh yeah, or so online. Yeah, we have some questions online.
First of all, do we have any online questions, Craig? None. Okay. Who was it? Ah.
Has there been any revival in eastern part of Germany in the number of people going to church, or has it continued to, like in the United States, get to be fewer and fewer people going to church?
After the unification, there was a small uptick in church memberships because of a lot of people who weren't members and thought, well, I can now freely choose to be a member and don't have to fear any repression, they said, well, no, I can become a member of the church. Or people who said, well, the church, it did so much for me in this difficult time because it was always inviting and had always room for us. I want to become a member. But some members realized, we now implemented the system of Western Germany, and now I have to pay church tax, and left the church. But overall, and over the last 30 years, you can clearly see there's a decline in church membership. Yeah, I think we always hope it goes up again, and we see more people in the church, but it hasn't happened yet.
Oh,
Wait a second,
I'm hurrying.
so everyone can hear you.
Which part of the church was Erich Bonhoeffer?
Which part of the church?
Which was his
Which was his confession? I think he was a Lutheran, and he worked in a big part. He worked around Berlin. So, which was the state church of Berlin-Brandenburg, we call it today, the former state church of Prussia.
Early in your talk, you mentioned the land to the left of the Rhine went to France.
Yeah.
Was that just a happy giveaway, or was there a war? I wasn't really sure how it transpired.
Yeah, it was the big coalition wars with Napoleon, and that's where they took the land, and they pushed him back at the I don't know how you call it in English, Befreiungskriege in Deutschland, Befreiungskriege in Germany. It's like a freedom wars. They freed themselves and had some pretty famous battlefields. We have in the region where I live, you can still visit them, and we have a big monument in Leipzig. Maybe you saw that. It's called the Völkerschlachtdenkmal. You saw it. I don't know if there's an English name for it, but we call it the Völkerschlacht,
It was the People's War.
the People's War, right? Yeah, the People's War, and we have a big monument in Leipzig for it.
In that last map that you had up on the screen, you mentioned that there was more yellow, which indicated the Catholic areas had spread to the north. Is that a trend? Are more people attracted to Catholicism right now?
Can we show the map again?
Yeah.
All right, I see it myself. You mean on the left side?
I'm sorry, yes, the left side, yeah.
No, on the left side, those are traditionally Catholic
Those were
areas.
okay, so
Yeah,
there's not a growth of it.
It's the region around the Rhine, and it's famous for being pretty Catholic, and they have pretty big carnival seasons. So, so if you're there in February, it's something. It's a very special time to be there.
So with the three groups, the Catholic, the Lutheran, the
Reformed.
The Reform, and the state, are those the groups, or did I get them wrong?
No religion.
Yeah,
No
it's no
religion.
religion. On the right side, it's no religion.
So it's the no religion group that's growing, essentially.
The no religion group is growing, and this map just shows which religion or not religion has the most members. So in Eastern Germany, we still have Protestants and we still have Catholics, but the absolute majority says in a survey, in the census, says no religion.
So-
And but on the upper left, there's Ostfriesland. I show you. It's right here on the coast. This is a pretty reformed region. It's pretty close to the Netherlands, and the Netherlands are famously Calvinists and Reformed, so it had a big impact on the northwestern part of Germany, and there are very much Protestants. But all Protestants on this map are just Protestant. You don't see if they are Lutheran or Reformed or United. And one picture I forgot to put in my presentation is you can see the different denominations on the pastor himself or herself. Because we have what we call Bäffchen, we have a rope like most of your pastors have, I think, but we have a little white cloth on our neck. It was historically, it came from the beards which the men powdered, and if you're wearing something black, all the powder gets on on your black clothes. So they had this white cloth, and there are 3 different kinds of it. If you are Lutheran, it goes strictly separated from top to bottom. If you are United, it's sewn together until the middle and then goes separated. And if you're a Reformed pastor like I am, it's sewn together till the end. So when you go to a Protestant service in Germany, you see right away if your pastor is Lutheran, Reformed, or United.
Can I ask?
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Can I ask,
yeah.
what is the status of non-Christian religions in Germany? Are they permitted to operate and own property and hold services and et cetera?
What do you mean?
Non-Christian religions in
Yeah.
Germany, are they allowed to practice their faith, to
Yeah.
buy churches, to, okay.
Yeah, they are, but yeah, it's not to be confused with on the right side. That's really the most are non-religious, but in Germany you can everything now is allowed. It wasn't back in the day, but now every religion is allowed. I think, but you can as a group, as a religious group, you can apply for being a Körperschaft des öffentlichen Rechts, a body of public law it is called, and you have special rights if you do it. The most famous ones are the Protestant and the Catholic Church, but there are a few smaller ones who apply for it, and they have certain benefits from it, like they can employ someone like a civil servant, like our church does, and apply for other things. And if you are a body of public law, as I would translate it, you can also say we want to send teachers for religion, because religion is a subject in German schools. You can choose between, most of the times you can choose between religion as a subject or ethics as a subject in school, from first grade to Abitur to the end of it. And but religion is still separated in Catholic religion, Protestant religion, but there now is also Jewish religion or possibly Muslim religion. But the problem there is always you have to be this body of public law, and our Muslim associations are very diverse. So they are not this one body that they can say we send them and we apply for this status, because they are not united. They are a lot of different groups. Yeah.
Just a funny anecdote.
Wait a second for the microphone, and then I
Yes.
see we have some questions.
In
on
West
Zoom.
Germany, the Judaism has had a revival. In East Germany, when I was in Berlin, there was only one rabbi,
Oh, yeah.
and he was a retired American Army officer that the East Germans tolerated. He was bilingual, bicultural, and was very well thought of. I met him a couple of times in Berlin.
Yes, from online, two things. First, a word of thanks from the Nettingas for your presentation, Reverend Jonas, and for your inspiring us to learn more. And then a question from Catherine Hartzler. Can you describe how much the church tax amounts to?
Yeah. The church tax in Germany is organized that the government takes it. So we are not so much separated, like I said, because our government takes in the church tax, and the church tax it depends on which state you are living in, is between 7 and 10% of your income tax. So you pay your income tax and you take that amount and you take 7 to 10% of it, and that's what goes to the church. If you are Catholic, then the Catholic Church, Protestant. But you have to say to which confession you belong, to which group, when you go to the city council. So let's say you move to a different house in a different region, and you go to the city office to say, I moved and I need to change it on my passport and on my ID. And then they ask you, where do you live and which religion do you belong to? Are you Catholic? Are you Protestant? Or are you non-religious? Then you don't pay the tax. But if you belong to one of the big churches, then you pay the tax. And it's, yeah. But it's, sometimes we say it's a fair system, because if you earn less money, then your income tax is lower, and then the amount of church tax you pay is lower. And if you earn more, then the amount is higher.
Did we have final questions?
I just wanted to mention that in Fairfax County here, where we're living, we're still grappling with religious choices, because this year, I think, is the first time we're celebrating Eid, which is the end of Ramadan. Those students can have that day off. That was never the case until really recently.
Yeah.
So it's always changing.
Do the Turks, the immigrants, practice the Muslim religion there, or do some of them convert?
I think some of them are practicing and some of them don't, but I don't see a lot of people converting, no.
Mm-hmm. Well, the German scholarship about the New Testament, is there any particular branch of the church where most of those scholars come from, or are they even religious? Some scholars are just historian types.
Well, I think you have to ask them, because I don't know every one of them. But yeah, most of the scholars I got to know, they are members of the church. And we sometimes, where I studied, we had university services where our faculty was responsible of, but it was for the whole university, and even our scholars, our professors, they preached sometimes there. Yeah. So I don't know, but maybe there are some scholars who more of a sort of historian.
Do we have final questions? Lois, anyone else after this? All right. And the final word goes to Lois.
I saved this because it's not kind of following your lecture so closely, but are you, within the church, are you struggling as we are with the LGBT issue, or is that more a wholly secular? Or answer it however you wish, actually.
Yeah, no, I think it's an issue because we as a church try to be open and try to be liberal in that way, that we are accepting everyone, but historically, the Protestant church tries to be a church of the whole population, because if you are a state church, you want everyone to be a part of, and you speak for everyone, sort of. So we have a pretty broad spectrum of political and faith beliefs. So yeah, there is some struggle. I think especially on the countryside, it's harder for us to be this open to everyone, but we are working on it. Thank you very much. I hope I could give you a small overview of our history, but I realized when I was doing the presentation it was a lot I tried to do, so I gave my best. Thank you very much.
Well, the good news is we'll have to have you back to do another presentation on your next visit. So, Nats ball games and presentation number 3 next time, right? Let us close in a word of prayer. We give you thanks, O God, for the sense of community, with this time together with one another, and with time to recognize our bonds with Christians across the world, with your people in Germany, throughout time as well as space. Be with us as we depart. Bless us on the days ahead, and bring us back together. In Jesus' name, amen. See you Sunday at 10.